There's a reason why you don't see paper, glass, or metal polluting our streets. It's because the market has assigned a value to that material. So certain sectors within a community will collect it and divert it away from nature and into the circular economy. We need to do that for plastic. Our model benefits the communities because we financially incentivize them to clean up. It benefits businesses because we give them a responsible way to offset their plastic footprints. And it benefits government that gets some relief on a heavily taxed waste system. And the cleanup benefits our planet, allowing nature a chance to heal.
Yeah, hello and welcome everyone to our launch webinar of our Plastic Pollution Reduction Standard, PPRS in short, version 8, Elevating Impact on Plastic Pollution. My name is Stephanie Beitin and I'm the Managing Director of PCX Solutions, and I'm really happy to guide you through the session today. Just last week, I was at a waste sorting center here in Buenos Aires, in Argentina, where I'm currently based, and I saw firsthand like a hard and very manual work, what is behind waste management. Waste that is discarded without even thinking about it. Waste which is often unnecessary, and waste that is generated for convenience in our daily lives. If plastic waste finds its way into a sorting center, it is already a lucky situation in comparison to so many million tons of waste which are simply dumped into nature or openly burned. Today, at the World Environment Day, we are launching the version 8 of our standard, which helps waste management projects around the world get additional funding for their operations and to make sure they deliver environmental but also social impact. Now, before we kick off, allow me to share a few housekeeping matters with you. Kindly indicate your name and organization as your display name on Zoom. We also placed all participants on mute just to reduce the background noise. We do also have a Q&A feature, so feel free to leave your questions. We might not have too much time during the panel. We will make sure that the most relevant questions are addressed after the event in writing. And lastly, this event is being recorded, and the recording will be shared publicly after the event. Now, if we look to the agenda for today, we have the short opening remarks of our founder, Nanette Medved-Pohl, followed by a presentation by my dear colleague Ethely on the key improvements in PPRS version 8. Following that, I have the pleasure to welcome 4 global experts for our panel discussion. So let's get started. Over to Nanette. As she had to jump on a plane right this morning, we recorded her remarks.
The global plastic crisis is one of the most pressing environmental issues we face today. While the impact is felt worldwide, it is the developing countries that are bearing the brunt of this crisis. These nations, which lack adequate waste management infrastructure, struggle to cope with the deluge of plastic waste. The Philippines, one of the biggest contributors of ocean-bound plastics, has moved quickly and boldly to tackle this crisis by rolling out one of the world's most ambitious extended producer responsibility laws over the last year. UN negotiators who are meeting on the Global Plastic Pollution Treaty must be equally bold if they are to find practical solutions to stem the tide of plastic production and clean up the over 9 billion tons of legacy plastic waste that threatens our planet today. The INC process is essential for creating clear global rules that businesses can align with and prepare for upcoming legislation. We need coordinated deployment of a wide array of solutions to address this very complex problem. Financing is a critical topic in these discussions. The UN estimates that we need about $1.6 trillion to combat plastic pollution by 2040. Innovative financing mechanisms like plastic credits are gaining attention. For example, the WorldBank recently issued a $100 million plastic credit bond to support such activities. Plastic credits provide a way to channel much needed funding to the highly underfunded waste sector in developing countries. Each plastic credit represents 1 metric ton of plastic waste that has been diverted from the environment through collection, transport, and processing. This system ensures that all activities are tracked, verified, and recorded on a public registry for transparency and traceability. Plastic credits can generate immediate positive environmental and social impacts. The projects registered under the PPRS standard currently have a combined capacity of over 250,000 tons of cleanup and processing that are ready to be deployed today. They can work in both voluntary and compliance-driven markets, complementing EPR schemes, and most importantly, changing the long-term unit economics of using plastic. We created the PPRS to set a benchmark for transparency, accountability, and effectiveness in plastic waste management. Since its inception, the PPRS has enabled us to ensure that every ton of plastic diverted from the environment is accounted for and processed responsibly. As this space evolves and consolidates, we will continue to improve the PPRS in close collaboration with all stakeholders to provide robust guidelines to enable impact at scale. We believe that all financing options will be needed to keep plastic pollution out of nature and to transition to a circular economy. Thank you for your continued support and commitment to this mission. Together, we can make a difference and be the generation that solves the plastic pollution crisis.
Okay, now it is my pleasure to introduce my dear colleague, Ethylie Reyes, Standard and Compliance Manager in PCX Solution, to take us through the key highlights of the version 8. Ethylie, the floor is yours. Over to you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Good day to everyone, and thank you again for joining us today. I'm Ethylie. I'm the Standards and Compliance Manager for PCX Solutions. And today, I'll take you through version 8 of our plastic pollution reduction standard. So the first concept that I'd like to start with is, of course, plastic credits. In the PPRS, we define plastic credits as 1 metric ton of post-consumer plastic waste that's been diverted away from nature, as evidenced and documented through verified collection, transportation, aggregation, recycling, and other processing methods. We fully intend plastic credits to fund the development of better waste management and circular economy solutions, as well as environmental rehabilitation and social justice interventions. So plastic credits can work in different ways, but here we have an example of how it usually works. We start off with companies or brands trying to understand their plastic footprint or their baseline. And depending on their corporate strategies, their corporate goals, they decide how much plastic to clean up based either on their compliance obligations or their voluntary commitments. Then through their funding of plastic credits, cleanup is now activated with our PPRS registered projects who should adhere to this standard. So once the cleanup and the end of waste processing is completed, the project partners provide the chain of custody documents that is then verified by a validation and verification body that's appointed by PCX Solutions. And only upon positive impact verification will the plastic credits be issued, and each credit would be assigned a unique serial number and then published on our PPRS registry. And before anything else, I would just also like to highlight the recent work that we've done with Prevent Waste Alliance. Prevent Waste Alliance is an industry working group that serves as an international think tank and do tank for circular economy practitioners. So what we did is we examined the different voluntary standards that are available for plastic credits and other mechanisms. And the result of this has been published as the guidelines on minimum requirements for plastic waste recovery and crediting standards. So, of course, we fully support this work that's being done by Prevent and other members of the industry towards continuous alignment across the industry, as it's important that all of us work towards furthering the credibility of plastic credits in general. Now, if you can see in the table here that the PPRS meets the minimum requirements in all aspects, and in some aspects even, such as auditing, traceability, and independence, we go beyond the minimum. Now, providing more detail into the version 8 that we have 5 modules available, but today we'll only highlight a few key subjects within these modules. So for the first part is the key processes in the PPRS. There are mainly two, that's project registration and credit issuance. Excuse me. And even before both these processes, we have to onboard third-party auditors who would serve as qualified validation and verification bodies, or what we call VVBs for short. So we work with VVBs who are able to demonstrate a good quality management system, experience in environmental and social auditing, and experience in waste management systems. So then once these VVBs are onboarded, they can be directly engaged by potential project partners to conduct their PPRS conformity assessment here. During the PPRS conformity assessment, the project VVB conducts document reviews, stakeholder interviews, and on-site walkthroughs to determine if the project and the project partner are able to meet the criteria and requirements of the PPRS as listed here. So there are 4 main criteria in the PPRS, and these are: number 1, sound environmental process. There's also additionality and ownership, and then the safeguard systems, and then traceability and transparency. So under these criteria, there are several requirements that the project partner needs to satisfy. So one by one, on sound environmental process, there are 2 major things that they need to show. And the first one being they need to be able to meet their compliance obligations to national and local laws. And they also need to be able to assess the environmental risks of their projects to relevant environmental aspects. And they should have actions in place to mitigate these risks. On additionality and the safeguards, I have separate slides later to go into more detail on that. But just dwelling on establishing ownership for a while, because this is also important. It's important for the project partner to be able to establish their ownership of the future credits to be generated, meaning they need to show that they have informed consent from all the members of the value chain, and they're able to ensure that no one in that value chain will double count, double claim, or double sell the tonnage that they intend to generate as credits. For traceability and transparency, the project partner should be able to track, monitor, and report their collections, transfers, and processing accurately. And these should all be auditable and verifiable so that later on these qualify for plastic credit issuance. So once the project receives a positive validation report from the VVB after the conformity assessment is done, then they would be able to register their project under the PPRS. PPRS registration is valid for 5 years, but it's subject to annual compliance review by the same project VVB. So once their project is registered, they would now be able to generate. So what happens is each time they collect and divert a specific amount of tonnage or post-consumer plastic waste, they would need to provide the chain of custody documents to our third-party validation verification body in charge of conducting the impact verification. And only upon positive verification of those documents would we be able to issue a credit serial number in the form of a plastic credit certificate, or what we call a PCC. So all the PCCs, chain of custody documents, and proof of verification, it will be recorded on the PPRS registry, along with other information that may be pertinent to the transaction. The PPRS registry would be publicly available, and as soon as we publish credits on the PPRS registry, they're also considered as retired, or as soon as these are issued to a certain credit buyer, they are already retired. Now, going back to environmental and social safeguards, this is not something that's new to the PPRS, but what we did for version 8 is that we listed down the specific applications to the project under PPRS so that conformity of the projects and of the project partners and the evaluation of conformities by the VVB is much clearer and more accessible. So we continue to align with the standards and policies that are set by credible organizations such as World Bank, IFC, and the Asian Development Bank. And we've now also included some references to the International Labor Organization standards as guidance for both the project partners and the VVBs. So we've highlighted the four categories of safeguards here. The first one being environmental and social risk management. So included here are social risk managements for vulnerable groups, and then environmental impact, resource efficiency, pollution prevention, and of course, respecting the prohibitions under the international conventions. So these would be evaluated by the VVB as well. The second one is on labor and working conditions. So we've included guidance on occupational health and safety, protections against child labor and forced labor, and of course, protection for both direct and indirect employees of the project partner. The third one is gender equality and social inclusion. And we would like to ensure here that discrimination and harassment of any kind is safeguarded against and that best practices on equality and inclusivity are encouraged. The last one being a feedback and grievance mechanism for both PCX solutions and the project partners, to allow continuous feedback of the stakeholders to either the project or PPRS. So now we go back to additionality. So we've actually adopted a regional approach to baselining so that the project partners are not only able to demonstrate their project's additionality quantitatively, but also qualitatively, which we'll see in the next slide. So in terms of quantitative additionality, the project partners can demonstrate that they're improving on the baselines by collecting waste streams that were either previously not being collected, or they were already being collected but very unlikely to be responsibly processed or managed. They may also demonstrate quantitative additionality by showing that they are now able to divert waste streams into higher levels of processing. So an example of this would be if we have a project that's already existing and they're collecting already some amount of plastic waste, they can still demonstrate additionality if they're able to prove that plastic credits would help them establish like new collection points or bring in more waste streams, or perhaps allow them to move from co-processing to recycling of some parts of the waste stream, or even if they're able to show that they need the support of plastic credits to sustain their operations, because if their operations would stop, then that would mean that a certain tonnage of previously collected waste would no longer be managed. So we've actually included this additionality tree in the version 8 to provide clarity to both projects, VVBs, and even credit buyers. So if you see here, if the project can't demonstrate quantitative additionality based on the examples given earlier, they can now move to trying to prove qualitative additionality. So if projects intend to and are able to sufficiently demonstrate that the funding from plastic credits would be distributed across their value chain to provide socioeconomic benefits to communities and vulnerable groups, then this could qualify as additionality. So some examples of this would be providing increased or incremental wages to workers, or creating a more steady income for workers by shifting them from a material-based income to a service-based income. So usually, waste pickers would be paid based on the amount that they're able to provide. But for service-based incomes, they would be paid for the service that they actually do for the environment and for the community and even for the country. Another example would be if the project partner can include social security benefits above what is legally mandated, especially for the informal waste workers, such as health coverage, or providing programs that include them and empower vulnerable groups, or provide them livelihood opportunities within the circular economy. So on the second key process that we have on PPRS, this is the general flow that we have. And we've actually included the examples that you can see on our PPRS registry. So to demonstrate, once a project is registered, and they've already completed the certain tonnage of collection and diversion, then they can provide us with a chain of custody documents. These can be proof of collections, like you see here, some truck scale receipts, proof of receipt by the recycler, then proof of recycling by the same recycler, and then probably the trail that the product of the recycler, which in this case is our pet, has been forwarded to their customer. And once we receive those documents, our third-party impact verification auditor, or VVB, would then check the traceability, the accuracy, and the completeness of these documents. And only upon positive verification would we issue serial numbers and PCCs for the credit buyer that has been provided to us by the project partner. And after all the issuances are done, it is then that we put the transaction on the PPRS registry, and we're retiring that same credit. So in summary, the key changes in the version 8 are the following. So we refined existing and additional definitions to make sure that we're harmonized with globally accepted terminology. We elaborated the environmental and social safeguards. We adopted a regional baseline approach to allow both quantitative and qualitative determination of additionality. And then we've also elaborated on the project registration process as well as the plastic credit issuance process, and we've formalized our validation and verification model for both. Then we also made the decision to transition away from net zero plastic waste certifications, while there is not yet a global consensus on the claims that may be made with plastic credits. And instead, we simply advise credit buyers to be guided by existing ISO standards or UNEP guidelines on self-declared or other environmental claims. So yeah, this is my last slide. And as a final message, I'd like to thank everyone, all the stakeholders and all the users of the PPRS for providing feedback to us during the public consultation process and during the external review process. So if you would like to know more about PPRS, or if you have any questions, suggestions, feel free to reach us through our website or through our email at info@pcxsolutions.org. And with that, I'll turn you back over to Stephanie. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ethely. I think this was really helpful. And we already answered a couple of questions in the Q&A, but there are a few more for you. So you can keep them coming, and Ethely can answer them in the chat while we are starting with the moderated discussion. So yeah, we're coming to the moderated discussion, to the panel, and it's titled Enhancing Impact, Why Standards Are Important to Deliver Environmental and Social Benefits. We wanted to include some voices from global experts on the topic of standards and on the evolving plastic credit landscape more broadly. So I'm very happy to welcome my distinguished speakers. So we do have Thao Wang, Senior Environmental and Climate Change Specialist from the WorldBank, Mira Notch, Implementation Manager for the Vietnam component of the global project Go Circular by the German GIZ, Van der Meulen, Managing Director, Country Union Philippines, and Ilusion Farias, Managing Director, Friends of Hope. Welcome all, and thank you so much for joining us today. So there are actually about 8 million tons of legacy plastic waste out in nature. And even if we get a really strong plastic treaty and are able to freeze current production and reduce by 30% by 2050, that would still leave us with additional 11 billion tons of plastic waste, which needs to be responsibly managed. As Nanette mentioned in her remarks, the UN estimates that we need $1.64 trillion to combat plastic pollution by 2040. So Thao, I would like to start with you, because plastic credits are the new kids on the block of the financing opportunities in the fight against plastic pollution. And they have been discussed at the INC4 in Ottawa. And also the World Bank had issued a 100 million bond at the beginning of the year. So maybe just my question to you is, where do you see them in the range of solutions? And can you share a little bit more about the bond?
Thanks, Stephanie. Good morning, good evening, colleagues. Very happy to be here. Thanks for the opportunity. Yes, Stephanie, I think let me start with introducing the World Bank Plastic Waste Reduction Linked Bond. Nanette also mentioned that in her opening remarks. This was a bond that the World Bank issued last January. It's an outcome-based bond, 7-year maturity, $100 million principal value. The bond structure provides investors with a financial return linked to plastic credits and carbon credits to be generated by 2 projects in Ghana and Indonesia. So the project developers on the ground can receive upfront financing through the bond transaction because the investors forego some of their coupon payment, and that allows the project developer to receive the upfront financing to invest in some of the plastic waste recycling facilities and putting in practice so that the plastic waste can be recycled and also the plastic credits can be generated. And then that will turn into revenue, and then part of that will be used to pay back the bond investors. So this is an excellent example of deploying the outcome-based financing instrument to tackle plastic waste, plastic pollution, and embedding the plastic credit into a bond structure. So we at the World Bank see that plastic credit and embedded into a bond structure is a outcome-based financing tool that can drive funding towards results and enhancing monitoring, reporting, and verification. And as a result, it can inject clear accountability and catalyze investment towards environmental and social impacts. However, we also recognize that the challenge for addressing plastic pollution is enormous. So we need a variety of instruments and tools in the toolbox to really tackle this challenge. Plastic credit and plastic bond is one of the tools in the toolbox. It shouldn't displace the efforts and commitments in many other areas. And also at its nascent stage, there's a lot of work to be done to build a robust and healthy ecosystem that are conducive to produce high quality, high integrity products. So I'm very glad to see that today the version 8 of PPRS was launched, and this is certainly moving into the right direction. It's a very welcome development. So back to you, Stephanie.
Yeah, thank you so much. And it's great to hear, and I will get back to you with some follow-up questions in a bit. Mira, I would like to turn over to you because the GIZ supports the Prevent Waste Alliance, which has over 500 members from all around the waste management. And just ahead of INC4, Prevent actually published the guidelines on minimum requirements for plastic waste recovery and crediting standards. So a little bit building on what I just mentioned, that this consolidation, robustness, needs to happen. Can you please share why Prevent supported this process? And also, I heard that you co-developed a position paper on plastic credits like 3 years ago. And how have you seen the space evolving since? Over to you, Mira.
Yes, thank you, Stephanie. And great to hear about the PCX launch of the new version, as well as of the big bond from the World Bank. And really lots has happened. The Prevent first started looking into this topic in 2020 and 2021. That's when we started a pilot project with some of our members that was first applying plastic credits in countries such as Indonesia, but also Mexico. And then the first very critical papers came out, among others by the World Wide Fund for Nature, but also South Pole, I think you're all aware. And then we saw a need to look into these critical points together to see what we need to do in order to ensure that plastic credits can actually have a positive, real impact. And that's when, along with the pilot projects, the working group was set up in the Prevent on plastic credits. And the latest product, as Stephanie just mentioned, are the minimum requirements. It's a guideline for minimum requirements for plastic waste recovery and crediting standards. And it's the first time that standard setters are coming together to actually work on this. This has been a quite diverse field with many actors, from very elaborate credits and standards to quite more on-the-ground standards that are more looking at what can be done on the ground and trying to match both of them, because of course there's a social trade-off. We want to channel the financing to also the more very informal structures on the ground to improve the waste management. But at the same time, of course, make sure that it's additional, it creates real impact, and it does not contribute to some unsubstantiable green claims. So that's why in this 1 year long process, these requirements were developed. It's a set of 3 sets of requirements: 4 on transparency, including something like verified by independent third party and no double counting, over legal compliance with national law, over to impact, where we also really look at sorting out the recyclables, doing no harm, and encouraging better working conditions. And from that, really the discussion has come a long way. When we first look at plastic credits, also with the position paper and looking at it from a GIZ stand, where we also support our partners in many countries and also advise in which direction to go, there was quite a bit of a discussion on EPR and plastic credits. And I think there we have come to a conclusion overall, at least within the Prevent with many actors, that credits can present a meaningful transitional solution as schemes for extended producer responsibility are being set up, and they can complement it as long as there's still a gap in financing and there's no proper infrastructure on the ground in many countries. And I also see that when it comes to really establishing this real and transparent impact and following the waste hierarchy principle, these minimum requirements really address some key issues we identified back then. And maybe that's it for now. Thanks, Stephanie.
Sounds good. No, thank you. And I think that's also what we are trying to find, this balance between being like a very robust standard with a lot of safeguards, but in the same time being accessible for smaller projects or projects that are just starting off. So I think that was great. Yeah, I would turn over to Tom actually, because you are one of the auditors of the PPRS with projects around the world. And maybe you can share some of your experience, how such a conformity assessment actually works, and maybe what are some of the learnings for project partners that you can recommend to them. That would be fantastic.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, and good morning, good evening, everyone. I'm very glad to see this development of the version 8 of the PPRS standard being launched today. We've been involved actually from the very start as a verification body. So your question, how does it actually work? I think we can define that the audit process and procedure can be cut up in 4 different steps. So it all starts with the preparation of the audit by the project partner and the certification body or the verification body. So the preparation entails that the organization needs to understand the processes and standards very well, and needs to prepare documentation accordingly. The verification body then needs to review this documentation, any previous audits reports, if any, and the corrective actions that were taken on these previous audit reports. It also involves the planning and the scheduling of the actual audit. And then the second step is the actual audit. So apart from the remote review of documentation, there will be a site visit by one of our auditors or an auditor of a different verification body. The audit team or the auditor will then assess during the visit whether criteria and the parameters of the standards were implemented by the project partners and whether there is compliance with the standard. This includes the interviewing of staff, observation of documentation, the processes, the procedures, and the examination of records. Then is the reporting. So the auditor will now make a report which will cover the findings during the actual audit. In this report, it will list down the non-conformities and the conformities of the project partners and the findings. So the project partner now knows what kind of criteria are met and what criteria are not met. And then comes the last stage of the certification process, and that's the follow-up. So now the project partner needs to provide evidence on the criteria that were non-conform with the standard, that they have taken the necessary corrective actions to make it in compliance with the standard. So this is often the last step before certification is achieved. And yeah, this depends how long it usually takes. It depends on the project partner, but usually it takes 30 days from the closing meeting till the corrective actions need to be sent to the verification body. And then the verification body needs to assess whether those corrective actions are adequately addressed. So that's a little bit on how the process goes. Now I want to share some of the learnings that we have received from some of our project partners and some of our auditors. And first of all is really the importance of documentation. So as a project partner, it is vital that you have the evidence and the documentation that you can provide to the verification body that you are in compliance with, that you're following the traceability principles, you're following the additionality, both on the environmental and on the social front. So that is one extreme important learning. So prepare well, prepare your documentation and prepare your evidence. I think the second one is you need to have an effective internal adoption. So internal support within your organization. There needs to be adequate communication and training so that everyone within the organization is supportive of getting the certification. Because if you do not have that kind of adoption, you will come across various bottlenecks, and that will make it more difficult for you to become certified. And then the last one is continuous improvement. With any certification, we always ask for continuous improvement. So provide evidence that you are willing to continuously improve. I think that summarizes it mostly, right, Stephanie?
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you so much. And I think we had a few cases where environmental permits were missing, and that's why the whole process then took quite a bit. And as you say, I think it needs all hands on deck from the project and the staff to really support the process. So that leads perfectly over to Ilu, because you're like the voice on the ground, and you underwent conformity assessment to the PPRS, and you will also do the V8, I heard. So maybe you can share a little bit first of your project, of course, but then also about the process itself.
Thanks, Stephanie, and thank you everyone for being here. And so what we created was a waste to cash program focused on women handling these small sites across the Philippines. Up to date, we have about over 140 sites nationwide, which is a challenge on itself, right? Because we are not based in one single place. We don't work with one single processor. And to be honest, in our organization, this is not our area of expertise on the technicalities of plastic, of engineering, of processing. That is not who we are. We want to do right by the country and by people. So having a standard is extremely important. I think for us, one of the main things was with a standard, we can educate ourselves of what's acceptable and what's not. And in developing these processes, it was a huge guide, not only to how to develop our process, but who to partner up with in the processing side. What were the right questions to ask when we partner up? And that's still the case today. When we engage a processor, do you have all these documents? Are you certified in this way? Can you tell us about the process to make sure that our goodwill actually translates to what we're trying to do, right? Intentions matter, but also results matter a little bit more in the end. And we don't want to have the best intentions, but actually doing a disservice to what we want to do. So for us, that has been crucial. The other thing of why having standards is so important is, at least in our experience, I've seen the change in the Philippines in the language. We're now all speaking a very similar language, which wasn't the case 4 years ago or 5 years ago. Everybody was referring to things in different ways with different subjects. And so it became really hard to see, is this what you mean by processor? Is this what you mean by additionality? Is this what you mean by this? Now it's really easy to refer to a standard and being like, this is our definition across the board, and having people explain that, and that it's not our definition, but it's a set definition, right? That can be used. And the other thing with having a standard or using a standard, and why we chose to adopt it as well, is for us being a smaller player in the community base, it does open it levels the field a little bit for validation, right? When we apply for grants for our Arlington Data project or looking for funding, having the backing of that standard gives us credibility that it's not just us claiming that this is what we're doing. And that is super helpful. And as the standard has grown, it is now recognized, and they're like, okay, people understand what it means and what the project means. And that's extremely important. And it's in the financial, in that sense of grants and with organizations like USZ and GIZ, but it's also in our credits are up to par or better because of the social in the market, right? We can explain to them what the benefits are in a very clear way to everyone. So I think that that's part of the reason we adopt the standards, and we're also going to do the V8, because for us, it's also important to evolve with the standard itself and embed that into our projects to keep having those benefits.
Yeah, thank you so much. And it's great to hear that actually the definitions are worth it, because we're putting a lot of effort in definition. Then you're like, do they actually help? But then I'm glad to hear that this is helpful. And I think, Tom, I would go back to you on this. Maybe you can share a little bit what could be some of the challenges of plastic recovery projects today, and also the impact verification side of things. So in our case, also, as Athalie mentioned, our credits are always end-to-end. That means it must include collection, transporting, and processing of sorts. And then there is the impact verification of every single transaction. So maybe you can share a little bit about this work, Tom.
Thank you, Stephanie. And thanks, Illusion, for sharing that. Very interesting. So I think one of the challenges that we hear commonly and nowadays on plastic recovery projects, I think the first one is that most of the collection efforts are done by informal and under-organized groups or individuals with few administration, which means that it's very hard for them to provide the documentation or the evidence of the collection that they are doing. So this requires a collaborative approach. You know, many of these individuals might be undereducated and less fortunate social groups as well. So this requires a collaborative approach from the companies that are trying to formalize these collection efforts or are trying to process these collections or the collected plastic waste. So I think that's the first one. The second one, I think, is the resistance to change. So one of the most challenging aspects is overcoming this resistance from all of the stakeholders involved. So from your staff, but also from your partners that you are processing it with or you are collecting it with. Then I think the third would be the consistency and the accuracy of your project. So you need to ensure that it is consistent and accurate, and also your documentation is consistent and accurate. Because if it's not, then it is not easy for the verification body to guarantee that those collection and processing efforts are indeed credible and can be verified. So consistency and accuracy is always something that we as auditors look into, because if it's inconsistent, then we already know there's something wrong with the procedures or the processes that the project partner is following. Then your second question was on the importance of why there is a verification of every transaction. So every plastic credit on the PCX markets is also verified by an independent party. And I think that is actually a very strong decision that PCX has taken, because apart from the certification of PPRS, now you also have an additional verification of each of the plastic credits that are put and sold on the PCX markets. So this additional verification makes the credits much more credible, because during this verification, again, the documentation and the mass balance and is checked by an independent party to ensure that yeah, everything is in order. Then I think also it provides a lot more transparency. So because this additional verification is done, you now have a third party involved that has again measured the weight, the quantity of those plastic credits that are put on the market or sold on the market. And I think it also benefits in the compliance and the continuous improvements, because now we are monitoring, or the verification partner that is monitoring the plastic credits can also advise the project partners on certain documents that need to be included in the future, for example. What are the main bottlenecks that that project partners come across, and how can we ensure compliance across the board? So I think those are the main aspects that I think are of importance, Stephanie.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. And you mentioned something quite important about, like at the start, on how we can make sure we include also informal waste workers, and to really look at the social economic side of things. And this was something we worked really hard on this version 8, also introducing the qualitative additionality, because often in the environmental discussion, then the social side is overlooked. In the same time, we also don't want to overburden the projects with like reporting requirements. And I want to ask you, Ilu, how you try to showcase how the value is distributed throughout the value chain, how you get this data, because I think that's going forward more and more important for other projects, that we really can demonstrate that we are contributing to a fair transition here.
Yeah, I think for us, collecting data is extremely important. And I think that's something that projects don't do. And to Tom's point, it's something you have to do at the beginning. Hence, starting a project with a standard is always helpful because it guides you. What we do as a nonprofit and here in Hope in general with all of our projects is we are fully transparent. So we try to kind of see where the funds go and in which brackets the funds go. And if you visit our website and you visit our things, we even have a pie chart of how much money the community is getting, how much money is going to hauling, how much money the processor is getting, right? The reason for that is to create that transparency and improve that socio-economic impact. I think there's a lot of projects and a lot of that are doing well and do good and do a lot of good, but it's hard if you can't prove it. It's hard for somebody to invest in you. It's hard for to get those funds to replicate those things if you can't prove it. So you have to strike a balance, and it becomes tedious, but it needs to be embedded in your operations and everything you do, right? From beginning to end. Because even if you want to go through a standard, or you want to apply for a grant, or you want to sell a credit, you're going to have to prove all those different steps. So that is something that is very into Hope, like I said, into everything that we do. So for us, it's not difficult. But what we do, it doesn't need to mean that it's very tedious. You just need to be disciplined about it. And I think that that's the difference. When you try to go back and try to get that information, that's when it becomes really hard. But if you do it at the beginning, it's just at the same time you're doing a training, you answer 5 questions, right? And you start getting a baseline. It is embedding it in every part of your processes. Then it's not as tedious or as expensive for projects to do. And I think that that is the mind change, the mindset that needs to change in a lot of projects of that needs to be done from day one. So it's not overwhelming and it's easy to prove.
No, that's great. Thank you for sharing. And I hope that with the qualitative additionality, we already put more focus on, so then if projects see, hey, this is important because I can generate plastic credits because I will be a better employer or I share more value, then that's becoming also more interesting. So we hope that we get more projects that really look at the social economic side of things more and are able to demonstrate, as you say. Cool. Then let's look ahead in the next like 5-7 minutes that we have left. Let's look ahead what's coming up in the next few months in the plastic crediting landscape. And I would start with Mira. Maybe now that the Prevent Waste Alliance published the minimum requirements, what's next on the agenda of the plastic credit working group? Maybe you can share a bit.
Yes, thanks, Stephanie, for the question. The guidelines are very fresh out of the press, so there's no set working plan for the coming month. One hot topic, which has maybe not fully been mentioned here yet, is the issue of green claims, especially when it comes to plastic credits. There are companies who are claiming to be plastic neutral. And of course, that's something very difficult to prove. And there is also a heated debate on this and how this could be certified as well and how this can be done. There is some that argue it should go more into a direction of a claim that says it's contributing to better waste management rather than fully claiming not using any and being plastic neutral, because that's maybe a bit misleading. But as that is quite a big discussion and also having relationships to other processes that are ongoing, the Prevent Working Group is most likely going to look further into one of the three following topics. First is to do some more research on the available funds for plastic credits, to see how much financing could be secured and acquired for better waste management with plastic credits, and also how that can better contribute to cover the financing needs for waste management overall. Second is looking a bit more into the issue of pyrolysis. So this is this form of chemical recycling where plastics are recycled with heat, but also with chemical solutions, and you get kind of a plastic oil out of it as a product, which can be then used as a fuel, as a substitute fuel. And there is also not sure whether this is something that should be supported as a technology in emerging economies and developing countries. But still, it is another technology and another way to potentially deal with very hard to recycle plastic waste. So to what extent can we, and under what conditions could this also be accepted to be accounted for in plastic credits? And last but not least is, of course, the topic of how to now move on with the minimum requirements for plastic credits. So should there be a high integrity council that governs the application of these minimum requirements? How could this be overseen? Because we have these minimum requirements now, and they're really just the smallest common denominator. Many of the standard setters, the plastic credit issuers, such as PCX, actually have standards that are much higher than what is set out in the minimum requirements. But the idea is that all these other issuers, there's many small fish on the market, you could say, that also do good and mean to do good, but that they also have an orientation to follow, and that we just have a bit more for harmonization in order to also, this is the idea of the whole working group, to make sure that in general plastic credits can create the impact and are less subject to critique because they're trying to adhere to at least these minimum standards.
Awesome. Thank you, Mira. And a quick one, what would be your one thing that you would wish for in the next few months to happen in the fight against plastic pollution or in the plastic credit space?
Yes, I think it would be great to see some movement with regard to how to apply the minimum requirements and seeing some institutional setup. I'm not exactly sure what's the latest status of the discussions with regard to the plastic treaty, but potentially this could also be something that could be considered.
Awesome. Tao, then over to you, to your last questions. Maybe you can share some reflections from the first bond issuance and also how you see the whole outcome-based financing moving forward. And also, I would be curious if there's increased interest from investors to use like robust standards for plastic projects.
Certainly. Following the issuance of this first plastic bond, we have seen increasing interest from both the project developers and investors. As you may imagine, the plastic bond, combining plastic credits and carbon credits, really generate a huge amount of interest. Also, it has, achieved triple wins. Project developers can mobilize financing, then the investors can also have clear visibility what kind of project they are putting funding and supporting in, and also have verified results and outcomes. And then, of course, the World Bank as development finance institution, very happy to contribute to the development impacts, environmental, social, and economic. So going forward, we would like to continue working with partners to do more, replicating and scaling up. Not only repeating the same type of project activity, the same type of bond structure, but also continue breaking new frontiers. For example, let's be a bit innovative here. Can we apply plastic credit mechanism to support upstream plastic solutions? Reduce plastic reduction and consumption before they become waste. I think here we have a lot of important players in this space. We have auditors, we have on the ground project developers, and we have alliance. So if we can collectively, leverage our wisdom and experience to help moving plastic credit towards supporting upstream solutions, the impact will be more profound. And also, we are exploring the possibility of, using plastic bond, plastic credit to also combine that toolkit with the World Bank finance projects, combined with the World Bank traditional financing instruments, the investment operation, development policy operation, and we call program for results, so on and so forth, right? And then also, we wanted to see if we can support communities and countries that are most vulnerable, are in the most need, the small island developing states and least developed countries. So these are the directions that we want to really push ourselves towards. Now, let me just emphasize the point I raised earlier. To reach volume, to really achieve impact at scale, we need to elevate in the efforts in the following aspects. I think this is also the findings that from our recent market study on plastic credit. One is establish robust governance structure, strengthen the integrity, and strengthen the standardization of the system. I think the Prevent Waste Alliance, as Mira introduced, the setting minimal requirement, bring the standard organizations and the main players together is very welcome and really a good step in the right direction. So how do we really work further to enhance the consistency, harmonizing across the standard in terms of methodology, in terms of MRV? I think it's something that we are happy to also contribute. And then second is raising awareness, increase knowledge, because although, among us, we kind of familiar with the nuts and bolts and how it works. But if you talk to government officials, if you talk to financiers, normal investors, they're very much less familiar with how this will work. So we need to really enhance that effort. And then I was also hoping that the INC process can help really establish a conducive regulatory environment for innovative financing instrument for the type of tools that can be leveraged to address this challenge. Last but not least is really foster partnership and collaboration. So again, it's a pleasure to be here. I know that a lot of audience online. So I wanted to use the opportunity to call on everyone's support. I think we would love to continue working with partners like yours to move this agenda forward. And thank you very much. Back to you, Stephanie.
Yeah. Thank you, Tao. And we could not end this webinar on a better note. So I thank you so much for your sharing. I personally hope that we get a very strong treaty by the end of this year, or at the end of INC 5, we get a strong treaty text, and that plastic credits are mentioned as one financing mechanism. And with that, I would really like to end this panel discussion and thank all of my speakers for your time and your valuable contribution, and also for your help in really advancing the sector of plastic credits. They are an important tool in the toolbox, as we heard today. And if we work together, we can generate a lot of positive impact. And to end today, I want to thank all of you for joining today, and for the many questions that we were able to address on the go, and we might follow up with a few of them. It's great to see that interest. We will also share the whole recording with you by email, and check out our version 8 of the PPRS in full. The QR code is up on screen, and we also have the link in the chat, I guess. And please, don't hesitate to contact us if you're interested in partnering with us, either as a project partner or as a VVB, or are you just interested to learn more about plastic credits in general, or about our work on the EPR side and our plastic advisory services. So together, we can actually be the generation that solves the plastic pollution crisis. I thank you all very much, and see you soon.